Morning, Eric. How you doing today?
Hey, great, Ryan.
Thanks for coming on the Life After Business podcast.
Happy to do it.
We've got a lot of overlap with your past and some of the past of the business where I came from. So why don't you just kind of kick it off and give our listeners an overview of your experience from your college days into owning a business and a little bit of an overview.
Sure, sure. Well, I left Colorado College with a degree in political science, never thinking I'd go into business, and I went to work for a gentleman named Senator David Durenberger, U.S. Senator Durenberger, and learned a lot about running political campaigns. And actually, they hired a young attorney to be my boss, a guy who never went anywhere named Tim Pawlenty. Actually ended up running for president, and became governor of Minnesota. So I had a great fun time in politics, and learned a lot, and went off to graduate school in Washington D.C. to study public finance, thinking I'd live in D.C. and kind of be a lobbyist or something. And lo and behold, my brother called me up and said, do you want to go into business with me? I'm looking at this thing called digital printing. And I said, what's that? And he said, I don't know, but I met some smart guys that are doing it. And so I need a partner. So that's kind of, then I moved back to Minneapolis from Washington, D.C. and about, I guess, 1991, and went into business with my brother.
So what made you go from the aspiration of being a career politician or lobbyist to running a business?
Well, I guess it just sounded like a very interesting opportunity, and I was enjoying graduate school, but to be part of it was I just wasn't really enjoying the East Coast necessarily, and so I thought coming back to Minnesota, I grew up in Duluth, it would be nice, and I wanted to. And I wasn't sure I wanted to live in Washington. Well, I knew I didn't want to live in Washington D.C., so I was going to come back, and it just seemed like an interesting opportunity, and the timing was right.
So the timing, and you have a very interesting timing with this business and the industry. So why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of what the digital printing and what kind of the niche that you guys had, and kind of lay us some steps along the timeline within your company.
Sure. Well, it started as a blue printing company, which is sounds so ancient, but basically you take a vellum from an architect, which is a drawing on a piece of plastic, and then you'd put a piece of paper on top of that, and you'd push it in a machine, and then you'd do that 100 times, and then you would have a set of plans. And architects would need 10 sets or 20 sets, and so that was the how the business started. And then this was now in the 90s, and so people were starting to figure out CAD software. People were, kind of looking at digital printing, and so all this was happening simultaneously. But it started really as a blueprint company, which is really a very non-glamorous business. But if you did it right, it could be very profitable. And
What
there
was
there
the
were
price per click at that point? Like, what were people paying per blueprint?
Well, it's funny. I'm going back in my memory here, but I think it was kind of like 5 cents a square foot, and then one big print would be maybe, I guess, 6 square feet or something. So it was really a business of nickels, but you would try to get 2 million nickels a job or something. So
Right.
so it was really kind of a very mundane, grubby nickels kind of business. But once you captured projects, and then you would also capture the originals, and the architects would leave them with you, and then they would just call in and say, could I have 10 sets of prints or 20 sets or whatever. And as kind of a backstory, when I came back to Minnesota and I was in business with my brother, uh, I said, this doesn't seem as much fun as I thought. So I think we might need to figure this out a little bit. And he said, yeah, you're exactly right. And so I befriended a guy in San Francisco who was kind of the king of blueprinting. He had kind of cornered the whole market. And so it was probably one of my all-time best sales calls. I called him up and said, "Hey, Paul, I'd like to come to San Francisco and talk to you about this business." And he was actually selling his company. He was about 55, so he was on his way out. And so he was very happy to and very gracious to share with me his 20 years of secrets. And so that was really probably the all-time best sales call I ever made. And so I came back and with all the newfound information, and my brother and we had some good key managers, kind of redid the whole company, frankly. And he was an engineer, my friend in San Francisco, so production control, and we had a fleet of vehicles, and the kind of the main thing we started doing is running prints overnight, which no one else was really doing at the time. And
So how did your brother, when you came back, how did your brother take, I mean, what was the communication like? Did he know that you were coming back with a bunch of stuff that you guys wanted to implement? I mean, what was the dialogue between the two of you?
Yeah, well, so he actually, to his credit, had a very big network of guys all around the country doing this. There weren't a lot of people doing this niche, so you kind of knew who the best people were in every NFL city. And so when I said, "Who is the smartest guy you know?" he said, "Well, that would be my friend Paul in San Francisco." So to his credit, he had the connection, and then I went and kind of leveraged it, and he was fully on board because we both knew that Paul really, well, we believed he was smart, and then of course, because he was selling his company and cornered the whole market, that was kind of proof that he, in fact, was not only smart, but it was working as well. And so, so my brother, he was all for it.
So when you came back, where in this timeline with your brother did you buy in with your brother? Was there some sort of agreement between you two? What did that look like?
Well, and again, my memory is a little foggy here, but kind of part of the backstory was my father was also a non-working owner of the business, and so he and his brother, my father's brother, had been partners, and so I can't, oh man, I can't remember all the details exactly, but my brother had purchased, and the company had been doing very poorly. You would probably not remember this, but there was a big recession, in the beginning of the 90s, and so I think my brother was able to purchase a big chunk of the company from our uncle for a fairly good price, a fair price, but because things weren't going so well.
Fair according to the recession, right?
Fair according to the recession, and my uncle was actually a judge, and he wasn't interested really in being in the blueprint business. And then so through that, and we had set up a couple different owners, legal structures. We'd had another part of the business that we got into the color graphics, and we set that up as a separate entity. And so through it all, though, I think at the end of the day, we were kind of about a third partners on the business.
Got it. So I want you to restate the story that you've told me in the past about I honestly, I think is the quickest return on investment that any person in business has ever made with the machines that you guys ended up purchasing and part of the new operations that you were doing. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit of a lowdown on that?
Sure. Well, again, this was the blueprinting business, pre-digital, and I can't imagine the whole United States there's that many actual blueprint machines at that time. But we befriended a couple people that sold used equipment, and maybe a company was going out of business or an architecture firm was going out of business, and we could basically buy these, kind of contraption. My analogy would be snowmobiles when they first started out. I mean, if you went out with 5, you'd come back with 2. I mean, so they were always kind of broken and whatever. But so we were able to get them for, I want to just say like $500. And basically, if you ran, one job on them or something in an hour, you recouped your whole cost of the equipment in an hour. But it was they were herky jerky machines and they were always broken. So I don't want to make it sound like we were that smart. We just were willing to. I remember now that we had a guy, all he did was maintenance, and so he would literally be, fixing machines as they would go down. But yeah, so it was an interesting little niche that we get these machines for cheap, put them in, quick return on investment. So then really it became about managing the labor as a person. So labor as a percentage of sales was a huge metric for us. I mean, that was the game, was managing because it was kind of a cyclical. You'd get huge projects, and sometimes, like in November, we figured out all the engineers and architects would go deer hunting. So November was a very bad month for us, but we knew that, and so we'd manage the labor accordingly.
Got it. So as you are kind of the pioneers in the digital printing world, you have some interesting timelines that you guys were able to capture on. So kind of walk us through the steps through your growth and then the eventual exit.
Sure. Well, one of the things on the timeline was there was a huge blizzard on Halloween in 1991 that's kind of famous around certainly Minneapolis, maybe even the whole Midwest. And it basically shut down, the town for, a whole week. And of course, we had a lot of employees. And so we basically didn't get a job for a whole week. And so it literally, almost put us out of business because, as we're kind of building some momentum out of the recession, that was a very so we I think we basically had discussions. If we don't have a good December, this might be the end. I mean, we might have to button it up. But then the good news was the customer, the work hadn't gone away. It just kind of been mothballed because no one could literally get around town. And so that work did come flowing in December. And, from that point forward, and then as the economy was then getting better, so that Halloween blizzard was like getting knocked down on a sucker punch, and we were able to come back, and that was the start of it. And then, we worked hard, and we got smarter, and then, 1 month I think we made $40,000, and of course we worked every day all night, but so that was, okay, that's good. After we paid ourselves, and then I think, the next month, I think we made, a couple $100,000, and it was like, wow, we might, be onto something here because not again that we were necessarily that smart, but, the economy was getting better. There weren't many people that did what we did. We captured some big jobs, and all of a sudden now, we had some money to, reinvest and do things. And, that was probably about, 92 or something like that.
So a couple of things that I want to dive a little bit deeper into. So you said, as you've got, labor and costs and you've got a lack of jobs, explain, what were some of the challenges? Was it cash flow? Was it what was the agreements like with your customers? What kind of got you into that position?
Meaning,
so like with that blizzard, because I'm just kind of relating back to our old business where,
sure.
You've got all the costs of overhead from facilities,
sure.
labor, etc. And,
right.
One of the challenges our listeners like to address is, there's this whole thing of recurring revenue and predictable
sure.
revenue. But,
right.
What is it? You said that you got into that sucker punch, but then you'd mentioned that you got smarter, not necessarily that you knew all the things in the crystal ball, but kind of explain a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think a few things. One was my brother was a very talented sales executive, and he prior to this had actually been on the fast track at Best Buy Corporation, which is headquartered here in Minneapolis, and so he knew a lot about sales and marketing. And so one of the things we did is we installed a Telemagic system, which was really the beginning of now Salesforce.com is really that type of thing. So I think we literally kind of bet the whole company on we had about 10 sales guys to go from 5 contacts a day to 15. This was in the days when a salesman would have all his contacts on a shoebox, right? He'd have them on his desk, and then so we got everybody to load in their contacts into the system. And then, the system integrated, the computer integrated with the phone. And so we spent a lot of time, effort, and money, to get that going. And that was probably the single best thing we did. And even though it was somewhat, and then we hired a pretty talented sales executive and paid her a lot of money to be the sales manager. So part of it, we were a very sales focused company. So we would always say, we're not in the printing business, we're in the sales and marketing business. But, we figured out, 10 extra contacts a day by one person, right? That's 50 a week. That's that's 200, So we basically kind of figured out our sales force was making an extra 10,000 contacts a year. And I think we were ahead of today I think people, this is all kind of common sense, but we were, kind of on the cutting edge of that sales force automation stuff.
Reverse it all the way back to the amount of phone calls, appointments, proposals, and deals, right?
Well, right, and then we paid our salespeople very well, and they were, this is 25 years ago. I mean, they were making, a six-figure living. So really, I mean, we were very focused on selling, and then we were also very focused on. We also used to say, we're in the deadline management business. So, if a customer needed a work at 3 a.m, we had a guy with a pager and he'd run the work. Now we charged a lot for it, but so that was really, it was the sales automation. It was kind of the relentless focus on meeting customer deadlines, and then third, of course, charging for that because that's very valuable to people.
So then as you get into 92 and you're starting to make that when you had mentioned that you're starting to make a few $100,000 now, and you've got this kind of shift in mindset where you're starting to see the fruits of your labor, where does the dialogue go with you and your brother and the management team?
Well, we used to joke that by that time now we were developing little fiefdoms within the company. So we had a lamination center, and they would fight with the production center, and they would fight with the sales. So we joke that that's kind of a blessing because now we're big enough that we're actually having internal squabbles. So like I remember every week I would hold a sales and operations meeting, and then we would hash through, because salespeople want it faster and cheaper, and of course, operations people, want the requirements for the job, which salespeople forget sometimes. So that was all, right? I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's true. So we would just relentlessly focus on. In fact, I remember I put a lock on the production control center so the salespeople couldn't even go into it. So they had a little window, they would knock on, and the production people would answer the window. And so that was all good. We considered that good because those are better problems than waiting for the phone to ring.
And then you and your brother you started to see some stuff with the industry. So as you're, kind of looking out the front windshield, was it the industry? Was it the customers? I mean, you had mentioned that there was kind of this chatter within your industry about consolidation. I mean, kind of explain that to our listeners.
Sure. Well, again, I remember when a color copy was, $5, right?
So was my dad, by the way.
Right. So margins were great because, it was really bleeding edge, right? So we would literally send salespeople out and say, we'll run some color copies for you, Mr. Architecture firm. And, it was like, oh, wow, that's new. And right. So it was kind of fun and exciting. But, of course, like every good business, people start figuring it out, and so we could see that Kinko's was starting to figure it out, and so of course prices were going down, margins were going down, and you could just see that. And then with the digital stuff, customers might even well, probably your father, they'd buy their own equipment and put it in house, right? So that was going on as well, because with the digital, it wasn't the ammonia in your face. It was, the process had become very clean because the CAD software had gotten more sophisticated. The equipment, was digital. So it was really copiers, not blueprinting anymore. And so so customers could kind of maybe do it themselves. And so because part of the business was we ran copy centers inside architectural firms, for the firm. So we'd put in the equipment, we'd put in the people, we'd put in the processes, right? So, but as they were, getting smarter, they might say, well, maybe we'll do that ourselves. And so there was a big shift going on, and you could just feel it. And then, there was a consolidator going around the country, because he could see it as well. And so he was going to kind of pick off the best people in every market and then take it public.
So,
So,
with you and your brother, before I want to hear more about that, but with you and your brother, how old are you? How big is the company? Where were your heads at? Did one of you want to stay in the business, or like what was the kind of the conversations between you two?
well, let's see. So I was, we were probably both in he's a year younger, so we're in our mid 30s. And frankly, we'd had a really good run. I mean, we partially we worked hard, and as my dad likes to say, though, it's better to be lucky than smart. And so I think, we had some luck in there, and I think what was happening was, as the industry's changing, we would have probably, had to reinvest a bunch. Like I remember a discussion about, oh, we'll need $1 million computer system, because part of what through this all was happening was, we weren't probably investing, because we started out with very little money, and so there was kind of going to be this, boy, if you really want to make this really sustainable over the long haul, there's going to be some serious reinvestment. And with all the turmoil in the industry, I think we were saying, I'm not sure we want to take, that risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big, big piece of it.
So did this industry consolidator reach out to you, or did you explore a couple paths at the same time? What were the different options that you guys had seen?
Well, so again, my brother, had the connection, and this guy was very well known in the industry. He had done a roll up, I believe, of the auto parts stores, prior to doing this. Very savvy guy, and he had gone out and lined up, a bunch of money with a Wall Street investment bank. And I don't know if I ever saw this or I was told this, but I believe it's true. Is he was so smart. He'd go to trade shows. He actually owned a shop on the West Coast. His pitch was he'd hand out his financial statements because
Interesting.
he was so profitable and he knew no one could figure it out either. So I think he was kind of a just in time. He was kind of a Michael Dell. He figured out just in time inventory. So he was way ahead of everybody else. But so he was determined, I think, to consolidate the industry, which I think was a good move on his part.
So you guys were obviously a part of that then. Did he solicit you guys, or did the industry turmoil and the fact he had to reinvest have you guys, kind of push you guys to reach out to him?
Well, so again, he was a friend, really. So I
Okay.
wasn't necessarily reaching out or anything. We had known him for years, and we would see him, and we'd have dinner with him, and so it just became. I think he had purchased a couple of our friends, and one of the things about the guy that to his credit, he was a very honorable guy, and so the our friends that had been purchased, had gone well, right? So we had good insight into how he dealt with people and how he did his deals, and so we had a lot of good insight into him and how his practices. And so the answer is it just really, I think there was one other guy out of Texas who was, but not nearly on the scale. And so I think for all sorts of reasons, and again, in hindsight, I think we were 100% right. It was the right thing to go with him. And so that was, what we ended up doing.
How is he valuing companies? So, like, when you guys started the engagement process, I mean, did he have a system for evaluating companies? Or, I mean, obviously you've got some friends that are probably giving you some insights as well. So when you guys went through that process, what were some of the key takeaways that you had?
Well, one is, it's good to deal with people you trust, right? It's good
Right.
to deal with known people that you trust. I'd say that's, 95% of it. And then he was paying, a fair multiple, based on, the times and what I think is probably pretty standard practice. And he's a financial guy, so I mean he understood cash flow, and he's a pretty sophisticated guy. So again, I mean I don't think it was a big debate for us to go with him. And it frankly wasn't even, I necessarily think, a huge debate to leave the business. And so our situation might have been a little different, because it just seemed like it all kind of came together in the right way, and it wasn't a big, struggle. And
Doesn't seem like it was one big event. It kind of just like happened slowly over the course of conversations and trade shows
yeah,
and
yeah,
industry chatter.
yeah, I think that would be a fair statement. It was kind of over a period of a couple of years, it was just clear what was going on, and we had friends that, really good friends that had done deals with him, and like, yeah, this worked great. And so it's like, boy, that, how much more do you need than that?
So
And of
was there a
course,
dollar amount then that as you guys kind of just start to reverse engineer, you and your brother have a dollar amount in your head going, okay, well that makes sense for me.
no, and so I, of course, I do consulting now. So I'll say to people, what's your company worth? And they'll say, well, $3 million. And I'll say, why that? And they say, well, that's what I need. But I guess, we were sophisticated enough that, we knew what the company was worth, right? We understood cash flow, we understood, and of course, this gentleman had gone, to Wall Street, and he had a big, suitcase of money, and so, but no, we were, pretty clear on, reasonably what our company was worth, and he was probably willing to pay that and a little more. So it wasn't, yeah, as you said, it kind of unfolded over time. It wasn't a big mystery to us.
Did you guys do anything specifically to clean up the books, to right size your customer base? I mean, like, was there anything that you guys like intentionally did prior to engaging with him?
Not really, because we, this is part of the story. We got very sophisticated ourselves running our company on financials. So we were just, every month we'd run our financials, I think literally by the fifth business day of the next month we had, there's some plug numbers maybe, but for the most part, we knew what our margins should be. And funny, sometimes we'd look at the financials our CFO would hand us, and I can't remember the numbers, but the margin would be off like 1% or 2%, and we say, well, we know that's not right, because we know the margin should be this, and barring some weird aberration,
Mm-hmm.
we knew our numbers cold. Literally, I would joke, we'd say, oh, somebody got a subscription last month, and we look at one of them, and so
It's the
part
book
of
of
what
lists. You got to get there. They're making their cold calls. They need to get the book of lists.
Well, part of it was, when you have no, you literally had to sign, a PO to get a PO.
Right.
And I would literally, I would look at every invoice coming in. I'd sit in the conference room with my ham sandwich, and I'd literally, about half of them, I'd write a note, why are we paying shipping? What's this? What's that? And I'd
Yeah.
send it back. And so by the time, a check actually left the company, it was right, and everybody understood what was going on. And so in addition to the Salesforce stuff that we did, really tight financials and understanding cash flow was so the answer is we didn't really have to do much cleaning up, because if we hadn't sold the company, we would have just kept doing the same things anyway. So, I'm making it, sound all easy, but it took us several years to get dialed into that kind of a
Rhythm, right?
mindset. But we had the other little part, we had a very good advisory board of some very sophisticated, not from the industry, but some pretty sophisticated guys running, fairly sophisticated companies. And so they were part of the mix. And so they were there as kind of wise counsel, and I think we'd meet them, maybe once a quarter or something like that, and so they get a pack. That's the other thing. I'm a big believer in advisory boards. They get a packet, before the meeting, with the financials and insights into the company, and they'd come prepared. And we ran it very professionally. We paid them, and so that stuff is just invaluable. And I remember all the dumb things I'd say to them.
Like
And
what?
they, oh gee, things like, oh, the org chart. They asked me about the org chart, and I'd say, oh, you don't understand all the problems I have, and I was only 31 years old. So I mean, it's kind of funny now. I laugh because now I'm in that position. People do the same thing to me, and so they were all, they were gracious and polite. And of course, they're not part of your family, and so that's helpful because you don't have any emotional baggage. It's just a smart guy, giving you feedback, right?
So I gotta give you credit because you say it kind of all just happened, but and I don't know what you attribute to some of the hard times or that sucker punch that you got over the blizzard, but managing your company to the financials like that and the level of care that you have for that, because I mean that's your ultimate scorecard, right? I mean, so what you did is not necessarily all of that commonplace, and with all the consulting that you do, you probably see the same thing, right? Where you know, because there's enough room for error in the margins that certain companies make. So, I mean, you definitely had it cleaned, right? Because I think that's, when they say 80% of the deals fall through in due diligence, because the financials, they don't know where everything is and why.
Well, right. And so, yeah, they didn't, once we decided to do it, I mean, literally, I think it was 10 days. I mean, it was quick because there was nothing to really. So, part of the story is we had a guy from the industry, knew his numbers, and we laid our numbers on the table. We knew our numbers. And, sure, there were some questions and different stuff, but for the most part, there wasn't. I've been through, on other businesses I've sold, I've been through year-long due diligence processes, right? So I think it basically took about, 2 weeks or a month, and it was done because again, they understood and we understood. There weren't a bunch of mysteries. It wasn't a mystery, about who the customer, we had good customer, clean customer data. We knew our biggest customers to our smallest customers. We knew margin by customer. So again, there was not a whole lot to really debate.
So what's the difference then, for our listeners? I mean, you've had multiple experiences selling other companies, whether it's you personally being involved again or just advice. What are some of the things that you see that people do right, people do wrong, and the difference between your 2 week sale versus the year long transaction?
Well, in fairness, it helps to be, it's almost like we're purchased by a friend, so that, is really kind of a different thing. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so part of it is, I think sellers or, buyers are very skeptical, right? And if you're writing millions of dollars checks, I mean, you probably should be skeptical. And so part of our, you maybe a little unique story is, there was kind of a mutual trust already, right? Which is helpful. And so there were discrepancies and things that need to be discussed. But I mean, I think it was apparent that, we wanted to tell the truth and they wanted to tell the truth. And, if we can sort this out, it'll be a good, and then actually my brother, of course, was staying with the company. So, he wanted, as part of his career, it was a good thing to make it all work, correctly. And actually, I think we hit our earnout in like 8 months or something. I think we had like a
Jeez.
three earnout, and it, basically got over the finish line in 8 months. So, buyers are, I think, rightfully, kind of skeptical, and they want, and I've dealt with public companies, which is a whole nother level of, I mean,
Scrutiny.
yeah, I mean, where's that tax certificate from Tennessee 20 years ago, right? I mean, literally, I mean, that kind of, because, they have a fiduciary responsibility, and so that's a whole nother, kind of thing, and so they have to do things a certain way that maybe a private individual doesn't, of course.
So, what was your reasoning for getting involved in some other businesses? Was there something appealing about the business, the industry, the opportunity? Kind of explain the interest that you had.
Well, so we sold the business, and then I went off and worked at a kind of a big six accounting firm as a consultant, and so I learned in kind of the technology space. I learned about how big consulting firms work, and I actually was hired by a client to do, mergers and acquisitions work, and then around the telecom space. And then after that, I started doing kind of my own investing. And so I actually have gotten into things as an investor. And then I've just found, just because of my background, I mean, a lot of times then I'll kind of be, involved on just more of a than just a passive level, more of kind of as an advisor. And so, I don't really, I'm kind of industry agnostic, I'm just looking for interesting opportunities. And in the business I last got involved with, it actually sold to a public company. Again, there were people I knew, local people, and I started as a subprime investor. And but again, I knew them, and so not that is everything, but it's a lot, right? I mean, if a guy lives 2 miles away from you and your kids go to school together, that's different than somebody from New York City or something. So I'm always looking for relationships and trust. I don't really get out just investing in things. That's not really my model.
That's super interesting because you had the opportunity to really just do whatever you wanted after your event in your mid-30s. So what one of the biggest topics that we talk about, and a lot of our listeners I think struggle with, is they've been in their business for many, many decades, or if their identity is so fused together with with their company. So how did you go from how did you keep that distance, or like why are you still in the game, I guess, is a good question.
Well, of course, it's the old saying, you got to do something every day, and I'm a bad golfer, so I'm not in, I'm on, several, nonprofit boards, and I like to think I'm good at what I do, and I really, I spoke yesterday at the Twin Cities Estate Planning Society, and so I have part of my talk is, I have an empathy, for small or closely held business guys, because I am one. And then I think I have a skill set, that can be very helpful, having been through the whole kind of, on your back to sale, twice, right? So I've kind of, and a lot of other stuff in between, but I've kind of got it over the finish line twice. And so, I really enjoy it, and, it pays well, and so I'm always kind of looking for, probably like your dad, right? Looking for opportunities. And
well, and it's the relationships and trust too. So is there anything, a couple of things before we wrap up, is for the business owners that are kind of poking their head up for the first time and they're thinking that there might be a second stage, what are some of the words of wisdom you can give them as they're going through that kind of an emotional journey?
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point about the emotional journey, right? So I think part of what the blessing was, have you ever heard of the book, the E-Myth?
Yep.
Yeah, right. So I would encourage all your listeners maybe to read that book. And so basically, my gift was I never really had a skill set. So I didn't know anything. So I had to hire the right people, and I had to have an org chart, and I had to look at my financial statements. And so I wasn't, I was passionate about the business, but I wouldn't say I was emotionally invested. I think there's a difference, and I think sometimes people get a little goofy. It was always clear to me, I am not my business. I am a guy who has a nice family and great kids, and I like nonprofit stuff, and I like, certain recreational activities. So, I happen to do business because I like it and I think I'm good at it. But, my identity isn't, my business. And so, which I think in some ways is a blessing. And I'm not,
I agree.
I'm not saying that, everybody's got to do it their way and all that, but I think sometimes people, their identity and their business, it kind of gets mixed up. And I was always clear. And it's funny because our friends would, in the industry in our first business, I would say, well, you guys, we've been at this, most of them had been at it 35, as family businesses, and been at it a long time. And they'd say, you guys will be selling this company and you'll be off to something else in, 5 or 6 years. And they were exactly right. So, I mean, it's kind of funny. They even could kind of see it themselves, right? That, you're not really, this is a great opportunity, but you don't seem like, this is your whole life in
You're not
this.
fused together with
Yeah,
digital
exactly.
blueprints, right?
Yeah, right. I am not a blueprint. Right.
I love it. So if you are one of those guys and you consult with a lot of family businesses and private businesses, what is the first thing that they can do if they have lived and breathed that business and it kind of has become them? Have you seen anything that's really worked for them?
Well, I'm kind of a fundamentalist pragmatist. So, it starts with, understand your numbers, understand your cash flow. Do you have a good leadership team? And, the paradox in all of this is your business is worth more generally if you're not involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that's kind of hard for people to get their brain around. But I mean, the last 3 years, I was in the printing business. I went to work but it wasn't like, it all depended on me every day. In fact, very few things actually depended on me. And I was very clear there were certain things, I had to pay attention to, like sales to labor. But I hired and I mentored a guy all the way from truck driver to operations manager. He was kicking and screaming the whole way, but I knew that he was exactly the right guy. And to his credit, he did a wonderful job. And so he took, a lot of, the burden of the operations, off me. And again, I was still responsible. But then that freed me up to focus on, more, customer things, business development things, even though that wasn't, exactly my role. But by being a business owner, of course, you have all sorts of opportunities to kind of promote your business in the community, Rotary Club, et cetera, right? So.
I love it. So if there's one thing that we haven't touched on, or if there's one last piece of advice you want to leave our listeners with, what would it be?
Well, I would say, try to envision your business without you in it. And it's a journey. And then, hire good people, treat them well, pay them well, and, manage them well. And if you do that over time, you will free yourself up to, I think, I say to a lot of my clients, you can have your cake and eat it too, but you got to be very intentional. It doesn't just happen. And so a lot of these things, if you're intentional and you're kind of, if you do one thing right for 24 months, you've done 24 right things. So,
I like it.
so it would be really that, just pretend you're, outside your business and you couldn't come to work for a year. How would you run it? How would you run it?
So how can our listeners get a hold of you today?
They can reach me at, my phone number is 612-239-7833, or Eric at the Gustafson Group, .com. So it's TheGustaf as in Frank, SON.com.
Thanks for coming on the show, Eric.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Good to talk with you.